Still, living in that cramped apartment. My uncle laughed. Then my cousin's fiance noticed my watch, looked it up and found out it cost more than her yearly income. The table went cold. After that, I'm 32, and I've spent the better part of my adult life being treated like the family disappointment. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I didn't follow their plan. I didn't take the safe corporate job my dad wanted me to apply for after college. I didn't get married young, buy a house in the suburbs, or settle down into what they call a real life. Instead, I moved into a tiny apartment in the city with creaky floors and thin walls where I built a tech startup out of my living room that no one in my family understood or cared to understand. For years, I was the punchline, the guy who plays with computers and eats ramen every night. The one who missed Thanksgiving 3 years ago because I was pitching investors and never heard the end of it. To them, I wasn't chasing a dream. I was just avoiding reality. The thing is, I never really minded the apartment. Yeah, it was small, but it was mine. I was so deep into building something I believed in that I tuned out the snide remarks at family gatherings. At least I tried. My mom would always start the conversation with a forced smile and a strained, "So still doing your little computer thing." My sister Rachel, who married a regional bank manager and loved to let everyone know, would shake her head like I was a stray puppy that refused to be trained. But the worst was my Uncle Doug, my dad's older brother. He had that old-school money talks. Everything else is noise mindset. He ran a construction business and loved to talk about how he built something with his hands, unlike these soft millennials with their screens and apps. So when my cousin Brett, Doug's golden boy, got engaged, I expected the usual: a fancy dinner at some overpriced steakhouse, awkward small talk, fake smiles. I wasn't exactly close to Brett. He followed the family playbook to a business degree job in the family firm, flashy car lease, the whole 9 yards. His fiancée Claire was some Instagram fitness influencer who spoke in hashtags. I knew showing up would mean enduring the usual barrage of passive-aggressive jabs and smug glances from relatives who still thought I lived paycheck to paycheck. But I went anyway, not to prove anything. At least that's what I told myself, but because part of me still clung to the hope that maybe they'd treat me differently now. My company had finally started turning a real profit, and I just closed a 6-figure licensing deal. I hadn't told anyone in the family yet, not because I wanted to gloat, but because I didn't think they'd care. Still, I figured, why not show up and see? The dinner was held at this pretentious restaurant downtown with velvet booths and $28 salads. I arrived on time, dressed in a dark blazer and slacks. Nothing flashy, just clean and simple. I wore the one indulgence I bought myself when the deal closed, a Patek Philippe watch. It was understated, but elegant. The kind of thing most people wouldn't recognize unless they knew watches. I figured no one in my family would notice or care. I figured wrong. The moment I walked in, Uncle Doug gave me that signature bark of a laugh and slapped me on the back a little too hard. Still living in that cramped apartment. "Adam," he said, loud enough that a few people at nearby tables turned their heads. "But it's cozy when the rats tuck you in at night, huh?" I forced a chuckle. "It's not so bad. Rent's cheap and I'm downtown." Doug smirked and shook his head. "You'd rather throw money at rent than build equity. Man, your dad should have spanked some sense into you." Everyone laughed. Even my dad gave one of those pain smiles that said, "Don't make a scene." I bit my tongue and took a seat near the end of the table. Across from me was Brett and his fiancée Claire, who barely looked up from her phone until the appetizers arrived. I sat quietly sipping water and letting the conversations wash over me. Rachel talking about private school tuition, Doug bragging about a new property deal, Brett showing off photos from their Bali engagement shoot. Then, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, it happened. Claire leaned forward a little, her eyes narrowing. "Hey," she said, pointing casually. "Is that a Patek?" I blinked. "Yeah, surprised you know it." She let out a small laugh. "I did a sponsorship with a luxury watch brand last year, learned a few things." She paused. "That's not a base model." I shrugged, suddenly aware that all eyes at the table were on me. She tilted her head, lifted her phone under the table, and I could practically feel her fingers typing on Google. A second later, her smile faltered completely, like someone flipped a switch. She looked back up at me, then at Brett, then at the rest of the table. "That watch costs more than our honeymoon," she said, not trying to be quiet about it. "By a lot." The table went silent. Uncle Doug stopped mid-chew. Rachel's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. My dad shifted in his seat. No one said a word. And just like that, in a single moment, the dynamic shifted. Not because I had some fancy watch on my wrist, but because for the first time they realized something had changed. I wasn't just the broke computer guy anymore. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just sat back and watched the silence spread like wildfire. And that was only the beginning. The silence didn't last long, Uncle Doug wasn't the type to let anyone else have the last word, especially not someone he'd spent the last decade mocking. He leaned back in his chair trying to laugh it off, though his voice was just a little too sharp. "Well, look at you," he said. "Didn't know nerd work paid in gold these days." He gestured toward my wrist like it was some kind of offense. Must have been a gift, right? Or maybe a knockoff. I smiled politely. Nope, bought it myself. Claire still hadn't looked away from the screen of her phone. Her thumb was scrolling slowly like she was trying to confirm something. Brett leaned over and whispered something in her ear, but she barely reacted. She just gave the faintest shake of her head and glanced at me again, this time with a weird, calculating expression. I could see it already. The narrative in her mind was shifting, and she wasn't sure yet if she liked it. Dinner resumed, sort of. The mood had shifted, subtle but noticeable. Rachel started a new conversation about vacation homes, loudly emphasizing how her husband had just bought them a little getaway in Aspen. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but I recognized the edge. It was her way of reclaiming attention. Classic Rachel. She'd always had a sixth sense for when someone else was getting more than her allotted share of spotlight. My mom didn't say much, but I saw her glance toward me a few times, confused. I hadn't told her about the watch or the deal or anything. She probably assumed I was still struggling, still calling her once a month to ask for leftover recipes or news about distant relatives I barely remembered. I didn't hold it against her, but it was clear she wasn't sure how to square what she saw with the image she had of me in her head. Doug wasn't done, though. Of course he wasn't. When dessert came around, he tapped his fork against his wine glass and raised his voice to the whole table. "You know," he said, smirking in my direction, "we should all take a moment to celebrate Adam here. Got himself a fancy watch. That must mean the ramen startup finally paid off." Some people chuckled. My dad gave a stiff smile. I kept mine flat, saying nothing. I could feel it coming. He wasn't just making fun of me anymore. He was threatened. And when people like Doug feel threatened, they go on the attack. I mean, who would have guessed, Doug continued, that after all those years freeloading in that little shoebox apartment, you'd come out with something worth more than your car. You still drive that beater, by the way. I actually sold it, I replied casually, reaching for my coffee. Didn't really need it anymore. That raised a few eyebrows. Brett asked, "Wait, no car? How do you get around?" I paused, gave a soft shrug. "Driver?" Claire nearly choked on her sparkling water. "Wait, you have a driver?" That was the first genuine reaction I got from the whole table. Everyone suddenly looked alert. "Not full-time," I added. "Just when I'm in meetings or when I fly out for work, which is a lot lately." Rachel raised her voice a little. "Since when do you fly out for work?" Before I could answer, Doug laughed again, but it wasn't the same kind of laugh. It was bitter. "Oh, come on. What are we supposed to believe of your jet setting across the country now? What exactly do you do again? Selling apps or NFTs or something I could see?" Brett's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew I worked in tech, but clearly hadn't asked questions before. Claire, on the other hand, was practically glowing. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at her phone screen again. Her fingers moved quickly, and then she stopped. Her jaw went slack for just a second. Then she looked at Brett. "Babe," she said softly, "did you know your cousin's company just raised a Series B funding round 8 figures? It's in Forbes." That did it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was dead. You could have heard a fork drop. Everyone stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Uncle Doug's face turned a shade darker. My mom looked genuinely stunned. Rachel scoffed under her breath, and her husband muttered something I didn't catch. Even my dad blinked like he was seeing me for the first time in years. But Claire wasn't done, and she flipped her phone toward Brett, showing him the screen. "He's the founder. CEO. That broke the spell." Rachel leaned back, arms crossed. "That's probably just one of those online lists," she said quickly. "You know they'll publish anyone these days. I read somewhere they make up half that stuff just for clicks." Doug straightened in his seat, clenching his jaw. "Even if it's true," he muttered, "doesn't mean anything. You can play dress up all you want. But you're still the same kid who couldn't afford a Thanksgiving plane ticket 3 years ago." I didn't say anything. I just let the silence stretch again, because deep down, I could feel it. They weren't just confused anymore. They were angry. Not because I lied, not because I bragged, but because I hadn't needed them. I hadn't asked for help. I hadn't played their game or followed their map. And somehow I'd made it anyway. And for people like Doug, that kind of independence is insulting. The rest of the dinner passed in a strange haze. Conversations turned brittle. Laughter was forced. My mom tried to act normal, asking how work was going, but her tone was strained, like she was trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. My dad kept sipping his wine. Quiet. Rachel started talking about how influencers fake their net worth online and how people should be careful who they idolize. Her husband nodded along like a parrot. Claire kept stealing glances at me. She smiled at things I said even when I wasn't talking to her. Brett noticed. Doug did too. After dessert, people started leaving. Some offered stiff hugs, others just a quick nod. Rachel didn't even look at me. My mom gave me a half-hearted smile, clearly unsure how to process the evening. And then, there was Doug. As he pulled on his coat, he walked up beside me and leaned in. "Don't let it go to your head, kid," he said quietly. "Money doesn't make you part of this family." I turned to face him. Didn't know I needed an invitation. His jaw twitched, but he said nothing else. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I looked up at the sky, my breath fogging in front of me. I should have felt smug triumphant, but instead I just felt tired because I knew that dinner hadn't been the end of anything. It was the start, and the real tension was still coming. It wasn't even a week later when the betrayal hit. I got a call from my bank's fraud department on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of finalizing a partnership contract with a logistics software company. Big deal. Months in the making when the call came through. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to answer. The woman on the other end sounded professional, but serious. "Mr. Cross," she said, "we flagged a series of attempted access requests to your business account. Multiple login failures, then a successful one originating from a device in the Midwest. We've temporarily frozen access until we can verify it wasn't you." My heart dropped. "No, it wasn't," I said quickly. "I'm in New York. Who is it?" She explained they couldn't give me a name without a formal investigation, but that whoever it was had guessed my recovery email and security questions. They'd even tried to redirect my email access, likely to intercept two-factor codes. The only people who even knew that information? The old college nickname I once used, the street I grew up on, the name of my childhood dog, were family. I hung up and sat there in silence for a while, my coffee going cold beside me. It didn't take long to confirm what I already suspected. Later that night, I opened a shared folder on my old personal Google Drive, the one I hadn't touched in years, but had once used to send files to family back when I was the free tech support for the whole tree. It had a few harmless PDFs, old resumes, some pictures, and one document that stopped me cold. A spreadsheet, my old company's early cap table and pitch deck, a version I deleted from my local files ages ago, but apparently had uploaded here once by accident. I never thought twice about it back then, but someone had been poking around. The next day, I got a LinkedIn message from a guy I barely remembered, an angel investor I'd spoken to once a year ago. He sent a link to a new startup pitch that had hit his inbox, asking if it was a new arm of your company. I clicked the link, my stomach twisted. It was Brett. Brett had sent out a near-identical version of my original deck, barely altered under a new startup name. His name listed as founder and CEO. The product description word for word, what I had built. The pain point, the solution, the branding language. Even the font was the same. He'd stolen it. I didn't even know where to start. Part of me was stunned and part of me wasn't surprised at all. I thought back to that dinner, Claire scrolling, whispering to him, the tension in his eyes when she showed him the Forbes article. It made sense now. He wasn't just jealous, he was plotting, and he hadn't just copied a pitch. He'd submitted it to the same accelerator program I had gone through 2 years ago. I called a friend who worked on the review board there. Quietly, carefully, and sure enough, Brett had already made it past the first round under a different company name, but with a carbon copy product. His submission included proprietary back-end architecture that just happened to be the exact system I had built and protected with code obfuscation code that only someone with access to my local Git backups would know how to reverse. I paced my apartment in circles, my mind racing. How had he gotten into my files? And then I remembered the dinner. That weird moment when Claire had asked about my watch and scanned it. The lingering glances, the sudden curiosity. I'd left my phone on the table when I went to the restroom. And I hadn't thought twice about it. But I'd been careless. One password, one saved browser session, one forgotten link on my drive. And Brett had what he needed. He didn't just want to copy me, he wanted to be me. That realization stung more than I expected. I sat down and opened my laptop, logged into my legal team's internal portal. I didn't want to jump straight into war, but if I didn't act now, this could spiral into something I couldn't contain. Before I hit send, I hesitated because underneath the rage was something else. Betrayal. Brett was my cousin, my family, the guy I used to play Nintendo with in Grandma's basement. We weren't close, but we shared blood. We shared birthdays, holidays, stories. I never imagined he'd stab me in the back like this. Not to steal what I'd built, not to pretend he'd earned it. I remembered when I first started my company and everyone laughed behind my back. He included. He used to call it Adam's Nerd Fantasy League. I brushed it off. Let it roll because I thought one day they'll see. And now he'd seen. And instead of being proud, he tried to take it. I couldn't tell anyone in the family, not yet. I knew exactly how it would go. They'd say I was overreacting. That Brett probably didn't mean anything by it. That I should just talk to him and resolve it like family. But I wasn't about to let this slide. Not this time. And as I stared at the cease and desist template on my screen, I knew this wasn't just about a stolen pitch. This was war, and Brett had just fired the first shot. I didn't send the cease and desist that night. I hovered over the button for what felt like hours, my finger twitching, my eyes locked on the screen, but something inside me held back. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was denial. Or maybe deep down I still wanted to believe it wasn't real, that Brett had panicked or gotten carried away, that I could confront him, and he'd apologize, that there'd be a way to make it right. Instead, I just closed my laptop and sat there in the dark. That night I didn't sleep. I laid on the couch, staring up at the ceiling, hearing every creak in the old apartment like it was shouting at me. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw his name in my inbox, or Claire's smug smile across the table, or Doug leaning in to tell me I'd never be one of them. By the next morning, I knew I needed space. From all of it, the noise, the stress, the disappointment. I turned off my phone, forwarded my calls to voicemail, and packed a small bag. I left without telling anyone. Not my friends, not my assistant, not even my parents. I took the first train out of the city and headed upstate to a tiny rental cabin I'd found months ago, but never had time to visit. It wasn't much, just a weathered little place with a wood-burning stove, slow Wi-Fi, and a lake out back that looked like it hadn't seen a swimmer in decades. But it was quiet, and I needed quiet. For the first 2 days, I didn't open my laptop. I barely looked at my phone. I just sat on the old dock in a hoodie and jeans, watching ducks swim by and letting the silence stretch. The air smelled like pine and wet dirt, and for once no one was asking me to solve a problem or pitch an idea or explain what I did for a living. But inside, I felt hollow. Brett hadn't just stolen my pitch. He'd taken something I couldn't explain. He took the validation, that thing I'd worked years for. I told you so. I never said but always dreamed of. He turned it into a joke, into a shortcut. And the worst part, he might get away with it. I started spiraling. I imagined headlines. Rising tech star caught in IP dispute with family member. The press wouldn't care who was right. They'd run the story for clicks. Investors would panic. My company, my team would be the ones who suffered. People who trusted me. People who left stable jobs to build something with me. And now their futures were tied to mine. And mine was tied to Brett's theft. One morning I woke up to a voicemail from my dad. I hadn't spoken to him since the dinner. His voice was calm but clipped. "Hey Adam, just checking in. Your mom said you've been quiet. Look, I heard something weird from Doug today about Brett starting a company. He said you two were working together now. I guess that's cool if it's true, but you should have told us. Anyway, call me." Call? My throat clenched. Working together, Doug was already rewriting the story. I was livid, but I didn't call back. Instead, I opened my laptop and started digging. I found Brett's new company website. It had gone live 2 days ago. The logo was eerily similar to the one my designer had mocked up for my original launch. The copy barely rewritten. There was even a founder's letter that he must have lifted straight from one of my old Medium blog drafts. Except he'd swapped out every mention of my name, my story, my struggle, and replaced it with vague anecdotes about personal loss and a passion for innovation. He even included a photo of him in front of a whiteboard. I recognized my whiteboard. From a brainstorming session I'd held in my apartment last summer. He must have taken the photo during that one weekend. He crashed on my couch when his heat went out. I'd been kind enough to let him stay, thinking it was just family helping family. I felt sick. He didn't just copy my work. He collected it, stored it, saved it like a scavenger, waiting until the moment was right. And now he was parading around as the visionary I fought to become. That was the breaking point. For the next 2 days, I didn't leave the cabin. I stayed up late, piecing everything together. Every pitch deck version, every old email, every line of code. I tracked file access logs, screenshot, timestamps, metadata, anything that could prove what was mine. I created a folder labeled "It War Chest" and filled it with evidence. But I still didn't act because something in me had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Done trying to prove my worth to people who never saw me. Done showing up to family dinners where I had to justify my existence. Done keeping quiet to keep the peace. And maybe I didn't want revenge. Not yet. What I wanted was clarity. What I needed was distance. When I finally came back to the city, I didn't tell anyone. I slipped into my apartment like a ghost and sat on the floor watching the sunrise creep through the blinds. My inbox was overflowing. Investors, journalists, even a few distant cousins who had suddenly heard about the business and wanted to reconnect. And then, buried under it all, was an email from Brett. No subject, just a one-line message. "Let's talk before this gets messy." That was the moment I knew. He wasn't just hoping I'd ignore it. He expected me to because that's what I'd always done. But this time he'd picked the wrong version of me, and I wasn't walking away anymore. By the time I read Brett's email, I was a different person than the one who had slouched into that family dinner weeks earlier, unsure whether I even belonged at the table. The silence, the retreat, the betrayal, they'd all worked like a kiln, hardening me into something sharper, colder maybe, but focused, clear. I didn't reply to Brett. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I'd always done best, building. But this time, I wasn't just building products. I was building leverage. I hired a new legal team, a brutal firm known for intellectual property warfare. Not the guys you go to for contracts and compliance. These were the types who drank coffee out of "I sued Google" mugs and smiled through depositions like it was date night. I gave them everything. Emails, version history logs, screenshots of our shared family folders, timestamp code, commits, even that photo of Brett in front of my whiteboard. The lead attorney, Maya, looked through it all and said, "Oh, we've got him cold." At the same time, I called a friend of mine, Victor, who ran a boutique PR agency for high-profile tech founders. He wasn't cheap, but he was discreet. We crafted a plan, a story, one that would circulate quietly through the right channels, drop into the right inboxes, land on the desks of the same people Brett was trying to impress. The headline, "Unknown Cousin Tries to Clone Tech CEO's Startup Gets Exposed." It wasn't published yet, but it was ready, and I wasn't done. My company, which I had kept lean and private until now, was finally ready to scale. We've been holding back on growth because I didn't want to lose control. But now I had a reason to go big. I finalized a new Series C deal with a venture group that specialized in aggressive expansion. Within 2 months, we opened 2 new satellite offices, tripled the engineering team, and launched our product in 3 major cities. Revenue spiked. Press picked us up. Influencers in the tech space started name-dropping us in podcasts and newsletters. I got invited to speak at a major innovation summit in LA, a conference Brett would never be qualified to attend, let alone headline. Suddenly, I wasn't that guy with the apartment anymore. I was Adam Cross, founder of COA, rising name in AI logistics and predictive data, and people noticed, including family. Rachel was the first to reach out. She sent a message dripping in fake warmth. "Hey, stranger, just wanted to say how proud we are of you. Next time you're in town, let's do brunch." I didn't respond. My mom left a voicemail saying how she always believed in me, which was rich considering she used to call me twice a month to ask if I'd given up on that app thing yet. Even my dad reached out. Awkward, hesitant. He asked if I needed help managing all the new attention. Said he had contacts. I smiled when I heard it. He meant Doug, as if I'd ever take advice from the man who laughed at me for living in a box with a router. Doug, to his credit, stayed silent, but I could feel his presence like a shadow at the edge of the firelight, watching, waiting. I had my team quietly pull a business intelligence report on Brett's fake startup. It hadn't gained traction. After the first wave of investor interest fizzled, the brand went quiet. No updates, no hires, nothing. He tried to relaunch under a new name. But the problem with copying someone else's vision is you don't understand the why behind it. You're just mimicking the what. And now that I had the legal team watching, he couldn't make a move without risking a lawsuit. I held the power now, and I didn't have to flaunt it. That was the best part. One day, as I sat in the green room backstage at the LA Summit, adjusting the mic pack on my collar, I got a message from Claire. Just 3 words. "You were right." No explanation, no follow-up, but I knew what it meant. Brett had imploded. Maybe the pressure got to him. Maybe he tried to spin some lie that she saw through. Maybe she Googled my name again and saw what he was trying to bury. It didn't matter. I left her on red. After my keynote, 30 minutes on ethical AI and efficient systems, I got a standing ovation. A few VC partners came up afterward to ask for meetings. I smiled, shook hands, made notes, and as I left the venue, stepping into the black car my driver had waiting, I realized something. I hadn't thought about the apartment in weeks. I hadn't thought about the old cramped kitchen where I used to burn toast while debugging code, or the paper-thin walls that let me hear every conversation my upstairs neighbor had with his cat. But that place had made me just like the ridicule had made me sharper, just like the betrayal had made me colder. And now I was ready because Brett had taken a swing. And I let him think I stepped back. But I wasn't retreating. I was aiming. And he had no idea what was coming. The summit marked more than just a milestone in my company's rise. It marked a turning point in how I moved through the world. I was no longer playing defense, no longer reacting. I was calculating. And for the first time in my life, I had reach. That's the thing about success. When you're on the bottom, no one returns your emails. But when your name starts showing up in Wired or TechCrunch, the gatekeepers suddenly remember your name. Doors that once slammed shut before you even knocked, they swing open all smiles. And that's when the real setup began. It started with a meeting. I was invited to a private investor dinner in San Francisco, small high-stakes invitation only. A quiet little affair hosted by a group that specialized in rescuing struggling startups with potential. They called themselves an accelerator, but they were more like a shark tank with linen napkins. Everyone in that room had built broken or bought companies. And at the far end of the table, sipping a glass of Pinot like he belonged there, was Victor Crane, a managing partner at Halbert Capital. I didn't know much about Victor when I first heard of him, but one of my analysts flagged him weeks earlier during our internal review of Brett's investor trail. Victor had been CC'd on one of Brett's early outreach emails, the same emails that tried to pitch my product. Back then, Brett didn't know any better. He thought he could sell a pitch and hope no one dug too deep. But now that I was sitting across from Victor, I knew the man was smarter than that. So I asked him casually, "Whatever happened to that logistics AI deck you got a few months back? The one from, what was it? Sparrowtech." Victor blinked slow and deliberate. "You know about that?" I nodded. "Let's just say I'm familiar with the source material." He studied me for a beat, then smirked. Didn't go anywhere. Felt thin, like someone had stolen a blueprint without reading the manual. We both knew exactly what he meant. I didn't push further. I didn't need to because in that moment I saw the setup forming. These weren't people who like copycats. They didn't fund pretenders, but they did enjoy watching a well-executed takedown, especially if it protected their own reputations. Victor leaned in. "You looking to expand?" he asked. "Maybe," I replied. "If the timing's right, what if we helped?" I paused, feigning thought. "Depends on what you want in return," he grinned. "Just a seat at the table and maybe a story to follow." That night, back in my hotel suite, I opened a secure call with Maya, my lawyer. "I think it's time," I told her. She didn't ask what I meant. She'd been waiting. We launched a silent probe. Nothing official. Not yet. Just enough to track where Brett's fake startup had been incorporated, which accounts were attached to the filings, and most importantly, where the money had gone. And that's when I learned something that turned my stomach. He had taken out a personal loan backed by a family co-signer, my dad. Apparently, Brett had gone to him weeks after that dinner, spun some story about how I'd invited him to collaborate and was letting him take the lead on a new division. He said it was a family-first project that he didn't want to burden me with all the work, so he'd handle the pitch that I was too busy with the main company to manage another arm. And my dad, ever desperate to be part of something meaningful, had believed him. He co-signed a loan for $300,000. Doug's name was on the paperwork too. They pulled together a little family investment triangle, all under the illusion that they were finally cashing in on Adam's success. Brett had promised equity, promised they'd be paid back fivefold. But the money, it was gone. He'd spent most of it on branding consultants, paid shout-outs, a rented office space in a WeWork that he barely used, and of course Claire's wellness brand, which he was trying to launch alongside his startup as a synergy project. It was all smoke, and the fire was about to start. Maya and I sat down with the internal compliance officer at one of the largest startup expos in the country, the same one where Brett had submitted Sparrowtech to present. She pulled up the registration and frowned. "He forged this," she said, pointing at the listed patent references. "These don't even exist." That was enough to initiate a quiet disqualification. They didn't make a scene. They just removed his name from the speaker list. No call, no warning. And that was just the beginning. Because Victor, he wasn't just curious anymore. He was interested. He brought me into his circle, introduced me to a network of founders, analysts, and strategic advisors who specialized in consolidation, taking small, poorly managed companies with stolen ideas and legally dismantling them before they could do real damage to the market. And I was holding Exhibit A, but I wasn't ready to press the button just yet, because one last piece had fallen into place. An anonymous email from Claire. No subject line, no greeting, just one paragraph. You deserve to know. He used your login credentials to access your Drive folder. I watched him do it after the dinner. He said you'd never notice. I'm sorry. She included a screenshot of Brett's laptop open to my Drive folder with the metadata bar clearly visible. That was it. The final nail. I sat back in my chair staring at the screen. I had the motive, I had the proof, I had the allies, and now I had the permission. Revenge wasn't an act anymore. It was an operation. And every move I made next would be deliberate, legal, and devastating. Brett thought I'd gone quiet, but the silence was the sound of me loading the first volley. I waited until the annual cross-family summer gathering to execute the first move. It was tradition. Every July, the extended family gathered at my parents' lake house for a long weekend of sunburns, barbecue, and passive-aggressive judgment. I hadn't gone the past 2 years. Too busy, too tired, too unwilling to play the role of struggling tech guy in cargo shorts while Brett popped open champagne bottles like a third-rate influencer. But this year, I RSVP'd. And I brought guests, not just anyone. My new VP of Operations, Danny, and our lead counsel, Maya. Both sharp, composed, and perfectly capable of handling the business end of things. But more importantly, they looked the part. Danny pulled up in a sleek electric SUV, stepping out with sunglasses and an air of quiet authority. Maya wore a crisp linen blazer, gold watch flashing as she shook hands. I didn't need to say who they were. People just assumed. Rachel did a double take when she saw me. You came? Of course, I said, smiling. Family. The lake house hadn't changed. Same creaky deck chairs, same ugly boat Dad refused to get rid of, but the energy had. The moment I walked in, people moved differently, more cautious, more curious. Whispers started almost immediately. Uncle Doug greeted me with a stiff nod and a half-hearted chuckle. Heard you've been busy, city boy. I smiled. Yeah, had a little project I was working on. He said nothing else. And then Brett appeared wearing a golf polo 3 sizes too tight. Fake smile stretched across his face. Claire was nowhere in sight. Adam, he said, trying to sound casual. Long time, man. I shook his hand firmly. Been a minute. How's the startup? He faltered. Good, good. You know, early stages. Still building the foundation. I nodded. Funny, I've been hearing otherwise. Before he could ask what I meant, Maya stepped forward. Mr. Cross, she said, handing me a slim folder. Here are the documents you requested. All the filings are complete, and the letters have been sent. Thanks, I said, flipping the folder open just enough for Brett to see the logo at the top. SOS Legal Counsel. He blanched. I could see him piecing it together. The name, the timing, the woman. I gave him a look so neutral, it was almost cruel. Might be a good time to get your paperwork in order. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. That night after the barbecue and awkward mingling, I called a meeting on the deck. Everyone was there. Mom, Dad, Doug, Rachel, a few cousins. Brett sat off to the side, arms crossed. I wanted to clear something up. I began standing by the railing. There's been some confusion lately about what I do, about who I work with, and about who's allowed to claim involvement in my company. Rachel scoffed. Oh, come on. What is this, a TED Talk? I ignored her. Maya handed out copies of the cease and desist letter, 8 pages neatly stapled each with a cover note addressed to Brett Cross. Doug flipped through his with rising panic. What is this? It's legal notice, Maya said calmly, documenting multiple instances of IP theft, misrepresentation, and fraudulent investor outreach. You'll find the relevant exhibits attached. My dad looked stunned. Wait, Brett, you took his. Brett jumped up. It wasn't like that. I didn't steal anything. I just borrowed the format. It's a template. Everyone uses templates. I stepped forward. You use my words, my code, my diagrams. You even faked a founder letter with my life story in it. You accessed my files through my own Drive account without permission. That's not a template. That's theft. Doug stood up now, red-faced. So what, you're going to sue your own cousin? Make this into some kind of public spectacle? Maya answered before I could. That's up to Brett. He can settle, surrender all rights to his company name, issue a public retraction, and repay the outstanding loan, or we proceed with litigation and we will win. But I co-signed that loan, my dad said quietly. I'm on the hook. I turned to him slowly. Yes, you are. The silence that followed was heavy. It wrapped around the deck like fog. Doug exploded. You little snake, you planned this. I met his glare. No. Brett planned this. I just responded. Brett tried again. Adam, come on. We're family. I made a mistake. Okay. I panicked. I didn't think you'd actually what I asked. Hold you accountable, why not? You counted on the fact that I wouldn't, that I'd keep my head down like I always did, that I'd stay quiet, that I'd let you take credit for what I built. He went quiet. Claire wasn't there to defend him anymore. And no one else stepped in. That was the beauty of it. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just showed them who I'd become. That weekend ended with Maya hand-delivering a signed agreement. Brett folded within 48 hours. His company was officially dissolved. The domain was taken down, his social media wiped. A retraction letter was published on LinkedIn where he admitted missteps and misunderstandings while graciously stepping aside from his role in the industry. He looked noble, but everyone knew what had happened. Back in the city, Victor congratulated me on the elegant execution. He said it was one of the cleanest takedowns he'd seen in years. And as for Doug, he called me 3 weeks later, voice shaky, asking if I'd be willing to help clean up the fallout. Apparently, a few of his investor friends had found out about the fake startup and weren't happy. I didn't return the call because I wasn't done yet. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It unfolded slowly like a house rotting from the inside out. First quiet, then unmistakable. 3 weeks after the cease and desist was delivered, and Brett's fake startup was publicly shut down. The news quietly spread through the business circles that mattered. He tried to pivot, of course. He deleted his LinkedIn account for a few days, then brought it back with a sanitized bio and a new title, independent consultant. He added vague descriptions like tech innovator and strategic thinker. But it didn't stick. The word had gotten around. The investors he'd pitched started distancing themselves. A few posted generic warnings on Twitter about copycats in the space and due diligence red flags. Nobody named him directly, but they didn't have to. People in tech talk, and once you're labeled a fraud, there's no unlabeling it. Claire was gone, moved out, took her dog, scrubbed her socials of every trace of their engagement. I didn't hear from her again, but someone forwarded me an Instagram post she made a month later. Just a photo of a lake and a caption that read, "Lesson learned, never build your life on someone else's blueprint." Doug's construction company took a hit too. Apparently, one of the investors Brett had courted was a personal friend of Doug's who had considered backing a joint venture between Brett's startup and Doug's firm. When the truth came out, the investor pulled out of both. That one decision triggered a domino effect. Within 6 months, Doug had to sell off a key property at a loss. And one of his longest-standing subcontractors dropped him. At Thanksgiving, the family gathering was quieter than usual. I showed up late just long enough to say hello to my mom and dad, then stepped outside to sit on the porch. Rachel didn't speak to me. Doug avoided eye contact entirely. Brett wasn't there. I asked where he was. My dad cleared his throat. Out of town visiting Claire's parents, but there was no wedding on the horizon. No, save the dates, just silence. Eventually, my dad stepped outside and sat next to me. For a long time, we didn't speak, just watched the wind stir the brittle November leaves on the lawn. Then he said quietly, "I didn't know about the loan, about what he did." I nodded. "I know. I should have asked you. I should have believed in you." It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough. I stood up and gave him a pat on the shoulder. "You did what you thought was right. So did I." When I got back to the city that night, I opened my laptop, checked my calendar, and made a note. Next quarter, CO was slated to expand into 5 new markets. Our valuation had tripled since the summer, and we'd just been approved for a partnership with a major tech conglomerate I wasn't legally allowed to name yet. The apartment I once lived in, gone. I donated most of the furniture, handed the keys to a friend's younger brother who was trying to start his own company. I told him to build something that scared people, something so bold they'd laugh in his face, because I knew what that felt like. And I also knew how sweet it was when they stopped laughing. Brett never reached out again, not to apologize, not to explain, not even to fight back. In the end, he didn't just lose the startup, he lost everything he pretended to be. And me, I didn't just win, I earned it. The same hands they used to point and laugh now trembled to shake mine.